Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athletic trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase them all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. For this week's episode, we have an interview that reminds us of the human element in healthcare.
Which is very fitting in this suddenly, seemingly AI-focused world.
Ooh, that's true. We all want a little human now.
Yes, and I cannot be more excited for this episode because we are bringing on one of my doctorate mentors, Jeff Russell. He is one of the biggest reasons of why I got through Ohio University and doing our doctorate in athletic training. He is such a pioneer and is so human first.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good way to explain it.
I was just going to say, he's just an amazing human.
He really is. He really is. And he just, I'm not as good at words as he is. He's very good with his words. So I am not doing him justice. But when you hear him talk, you will definitely be able to tell just from the things he says, the way he carries himself, that he really cares about his students and he really cares about the patients and athletes who he works with.
Absolutely. So Dr. Jeff Russell is an associate professor of athletic training and the director of science and health and artistic performance at Ohio University. He received his Bachelor's of Arts in Sports Medicine from Rice University, his Master of Science in Athletic Training from the University of Arizona, and his PhD in Dance Medicine and Science from the University of Wolverhampton in the UK.
So I believe he was the first one to hold this title.
Yes.
And he just passed that along to myself because he helped me become the first person through Ohio University to do a performing arts medicine certificate. So it was really, really awesome. You can tell, really awesome to work with him.
I think that deserved the reggae horn.
So without further ado, let's hear from Jeff. You want to get us started, Randy?
Yes, absolutely. So no session is complete without starting with some cryo breakers. What athletic training tool, and this could be a tape, brace, or rehab, etc., basically anything in athletic training, describes you as a clinician?
Well, I feel like a nice heavy piece of TheraBand. So there's the TheraBands that are yellow and they're just like. But I'm talking about the silver one, right? That one. And the reason I picked that is because I just feel like I can be an encourager and an enabler and somebody that is trying to lift up students and young professionals, especially. I mean, I'll try to lift up anybody, but I really love having the chance to work with students and young professionals. And so, that little yellow TheraBand, that's not a lot of resistance to really develop much, but that thick silver one, oh man, you can get a lot of mileage out of that, and you can really develop some good strength there. So I just kind of see myself as something that can be a developer of people, right? Somebody that can just encourage and enable and empower and just try to give people a lift and make them better at what they're doing. So that's why I picked that.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. You know what? As you were talking about that, I was thinking, I just remember like you just always wanting to like pull more and more out of us. And that just really resembles that TheraBand as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I feel like if we're on this earth and we're around people, which is like 100% of the time, that always happens, right? That we ought to be investing in those people and trying to, I just see it as making other people as more important than myself, right? It's like to use what I've got, the things that I've been blessed with, the opportunities, the knowledge, the contacts, to be able to use that for other people, right? To help other people. I shouldn't be keeping it all to myself, right? This isn't Jeff Russell's kingdom. This is Jeff Russell trying to pour value into other people and trying to help them. I feel like if you're focused on helping others in your life, you're going to do good work, and you're going to get along farther and better and happier than if you did it just for you and yourself, right? That's just me, but I kind of think that one will work if people will adopt that viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. I like that.
So here on AT Corner, we also like to pair evidence and experience. So Jeff, would you be able to kick it off for us with a story about how you learned how whole person healthcare is so important?
Yeah, this is really interesting. So if you look at the literature, there's a lot of evidence for this, right? There are reams and reams and reams of evidence for people that have written about various aspects of whole person care. And they may call it something different, but the evidence may also speak to one particular part of it that is something that is it's an opportunity for a healthcare worker, or anybody really, but we're talking in a healthcare context here, to be able to find that one thing that maybe that's been missing out of their whole person care, right? So there's literature on the single pieces, and then there's literature on the whole part of it, right? So what I call whole person care is care that's devoted to the 6 dimensions of wellness. And so Dr. Bill Hetler, which is the model that I use for this, Dr. Bill Hetler, back in 1976, he published these 6 dimensions of wellness. So physical, emotional, intellectual, the social, occupational, the spiritual, right? So 6 of them: physical, emotional, intellectual, social, occupational, spiritual. So that spiritual one, that's the one that lots of people don't understand, and makes it really, really challenging perhaps to understand what to do with that. But it has to do primarily with purpose and meaning of your life, and what's the reason for you being here on this earth. There is so much literature on that. It's really striking, and it's very encouraging too. But my role in the 6 dimensions of wellness and trying to implement that into healthcare, it came about because I changed my career after 20 years of sports medicine and orthopedics to performing arts medicine. I really hadn't thought about whole person care until that happened. And so back 2001, 2002, I had a chance to start working with these performing artists when I was at Belhaven University. And I just realized these guys, somebody needed to do something, right? Here's all these guys with injuries. The dancers are coming to me. Can you help me with my injury? Somebody needs to do something, I said. And then I realized I'm somebody. And so that's when I purposed in my heart that I was going to do something, right? I said, okay, I'm somebody. I have some skills that I know. These guys need help. Let me see if I can help them. And so that was the beginning of understanding whole person care, because let me tell you, performing artists in particular really operate in that kind of a life, right? There's something just, I almost can't even put words to it, but there's something really unique about how performing artists are. Like, they're just lovely people to work with. They're extremely skilled. They do all kinds of phenomenal things that I can't do. So I can enjoy what they do since I can't do it myself, right? But I started seeing these guys, like they're super emotional, right? And so there's your emotional dimension, and they're super smart, right? They're really, really smart about these things that again, I have no knowledge of how to do, but learning choreography or learning lines in a play, or learning how to build things that look good in a set on a stage. All these different things that artists can do, right? So they have this intellect, and they're very social. Just the nature of arts, even with a solo, right? There's so many people that make a performance happen, right? If you want to think about this a little more, next movie that you see, watch the credits, right? You see how many people it takes to make a movie. Or the same thing, if you go to a theater performance and you read in the booklet about the performance, you see how many people it takes just to have this one thing on stage to be able to happen, right? And so there's this social aspect, and then occupational. I mean, they're the professionals, and even the students. You could consider it this way, because occupational for a student is really their student work. And so, think about someone's a dance major, right? You think about somebody that's a theater major, a music major. They think about anybody that's a professional in any of the different disciplines of performing arts. I mean, that's like their life, right? That's what they do. That's their thing, if you will, right? And then, of course, the spiritual part, like what's your purpose? What's your meaning? Why are you on this earth? And being an artist is just inscribed across their heart. I mean, I just equate it almost to like a signature. It's like artist is just written right across them, deep in their souls. And so these things, all this is just demonstrates how we deal with this. And I had to learn this, right? I mean, I was seeing in these artists these different characteristics, and I started thinking about it. And I went looking for information, and I just happened across this thing that at the time was called the National Wellness Institute. It's part of a larger organization now, but the National Wellness Institute, that's where Dr. Hetler was, affiliated with. And I found this 6 Dimensions of Wellness document, and it's basically a hexagon, and it's got the 6 different pieces in the illustration, and it shows how a person's made up of all 6. And so, as I started thinking about this and learning about this, I realized this has to be part of healthcare. And now I'm a professor at a university too, right? So I deal with students all the time in classes. I use a 6 dimensions of wellness model in my teaching as well. I can't just think about a student in an intellectual capacity because they're using their brain and they're learning something I'm teaching them, right? That's only one dimension. I've got to look at all the other, because their emotions, their social interactions, right? All these other dimensions, they all feed into what's going on in the intellectual. They're all interrelated, and that's key. That's key to remember. These 6 dimensions they're all interrelated. And so, in athletic training or any other healthcare field, you think physical, right? I mean, everything we do is physical by and large. Sprained ankle, torn ACL, dislocated shoulder, on and on, right? These are all physical things. And I think most people have a general idea that there's an emotional component. We talk about like the psycho-emotional, or, the psychological readiness to go back to participation after an injury, things like that. But I think there's some holes in the hole, right? Some HOLEs in the WHOLE, because you're only dealing, if you deal with the physical and the emotional, you're still leaving out 4. And so you got some holes in the hole. And so I really feel like that this works, because I saw it from the very beginning of that transition in my career, and it's corroborated in the scientific literature as well. And so that's really how I got started with this, and how I've developed it, and now I've had a chance to teach it to students, and to be able to apply it myself, and I just think it works. I mean, because I've seen it work, and I've had other people that have learned it, and they've fed back to me, this really works. Like, I really appreciate this. This is something that's helping me. This is something that has been useful to me in my healthcare career. So anyways, that's how I got started, and a little bit more fullness about some of like how it works and some of the idea behind it.
You bring up a interesting kind of topic that I think most healthcare professionals might get a little uncomfortable with, is switching into a different like setting or a different kind of activity. Because like you said, you didn't really start in performing arts. You kind of just emerged and kind of learned about it. So how do you apply healthcare and whole person healthcare to someone in an activity that you may not have any experience in?
Yeah, that's really a good one. So I started out as a traditional athletic trainer. I worked at Texas Lutheran University. That was my very first job, like 1982 to 1986. So like long time ago, right? But I did that, and then I worked a year in orthopedic rehabilitation. And then I went to orthopedics. I was working in orthopedic research and education in the Texas Medical Center in Houston. And so as I was doing that, I think being prepared, because the things that I had done were very innovative, and I had to like basically set up a new program. I had to revise the entire sports medicine program at Texas Lutheran, and I when I was working in orthopedics and sports medicine, orthopedic sports medicine, but also general orthopedics, I was working in the medical center. So they're setting up this new institute that the physician group had developed, and so I was being primed for doing new things, innovative things, right, which I really, really like. That really resonates well with me. And so I think that once I got to performing arts medicine, it's like, this just seems natural to me, right? Once I had the brain switch that said, oh yeah, you're somebody and you need to be the one that starts making a difference in these guys' lives. Once I had that brain switch, that was just natural to me to figure out what I had to do to be able to accomplish that, right? And so that's when really that 6 dimensions of wellness took hold. And so I guess really to answer the question, so the first thing, when you switch to something new, zip your lips and open your ears, right? So I sat with these artists, and I closed my mouth, I opened my ears, and I said, what is it that you need to be able to do? Teach me these French words that you're using in your ballet class, right? That you're talking to me with, right? Teach me what that means. Tell me about what's required for you to sit with a guitar and to be able to play your instrument. Explain to me what you're doing backstage as you're trying to build these sets. Like, just tell me the things that you're doing. Like, what physically are you doing? What are the demands on your body? And then once I heard that, then I said, all right, now I want to develop a partnership with you. I want to work together with you. I want to take what you know about performing arts. I want to take what I know about sports medicine, about rehabilitation, about all the different things that I know in that area. And let's work together and see if we can't come up with a solution that's going to help you get back to what you want to do as quick as you can. So I just took what I knew as an athletic trainer and combined it with what these guys were telling me. And they were so appreciative because, again, I'm starting to learn this whole person care, and it just started working, and I was having success. And so what happens when you have success? Well, you try to replicate the success, right? You keep learning, and you do better, and every time it got a little bit better, a little bit better. You learn more. So I learned these couple of French words with this one patient. Okay, next patient that comes, I'm using French words with them, and they're like, oh, wow, you actually care about what you're doing with us. You actually care about the things that we care about, right? I'm just very innocently trying to do my best for them, and it works out. Mm-hmm. And I just really feel like that's the way to do it. If somebody's in a position of switching to something new, and you don't have to be making the switch I did. You don't have to be switching to performing arts medicine. You could be switching to something else. You could be switching from high school to industrial athletic training, right? You could be switching from public safety athletic training to military, or to college, or to professional sports athletic training, right? Whatever the switches that you're making, you just have to zip this, open these, and just pay attention to what they're telling you and learn their world so that you can operate in their world effectively, not on them, but with them, mm-hmm. Right? We don't practice on these people. We practice with these people, right? Our healthcare practice should be a partnership that we're developing with these patients. And again, thinking about evidence-based practice, you look at the literature on patient-oriented outcomes, patient-oriented care, like all of that. That's something that is part and parcel of what we ought to be doing, and it's supported in the literature. So I think that's the way to do it. Did I answer that question the right way? Is that what you were after? Because awesome. I really see that the switch over is a lot more manageable if you're gaining the information you need, and if you're, again, applying that whole person type of care.
I really like what you said about developing a partnership with them, and it's not like we're practicing on them, we're practicing with them.
I was gonna say, I really like that perspective. That's I haven't heard that one before. I like that.
Yeah, that's a very similar idea to what we call community engaged research.
Mm-hmm.
So when I do research, so my main area of research is concussions in film and television stunt performers. Well, as you might imagine, I'm not a film and television stunt performer. So consequently, I've got to have film and television stunt performers who are part of my research group if I want to effectively do research with that community. And notice I'm saying doing research with the community, not research on a community. Because usually in research, we think, well, we have this group of participants and we're doing a study on them. Right? That's like our common terminology. Well, I don't want to do a study on them. I want to do a study with them. And so I have these colleagues of mine, these stunt performers, who are legitimately what we call community engaged co-investigators, right? They're bona fide researchers in my research group. If you look at any of the articles that I've written, you'll see their names there, right? I mean, they're part of the team. And I do this not just with the stunt performers, but I do it with any of the research work I do. But we've got those guys there to represent the best interests of the community, right? So it's the same basic idea. So community engagement is a huge concept in universities today. And so once I started learning about that here at Ohio University, that's when I started applying it in my own research. So again, you see a shift in thinking, right? Because I've learned something new, and now I'm applying that to my particular situation. So community doesn't have to just be the community around the locale of the university. My community, well, it's in Los Angeles, it's in Chicago, it's in Vancouver, it's in Alberta. It's wherever these stunt performers are. That's where the communities of stunt performers are. And so I work with them. So the same principle works super well, as I've described, with healthcare, right? You create this partnership because, yeah, you may have played sports, right? But in this day and time, you're an athletic trainer, and you're caring for somebody who is actively engaged in sports right now in the current time frame, right? And so you want their perspective. You can never have somebody's perspective unless you ask them to give it to you, right? You have to talk to them and let them know, A, you care about them, B, you want to get to know them better, and C, that they have vital information that you need that is going to help you care for them better. And so you just, through that process, develop this relationship. I call it a partnership. I don't know if there's a better word for it. I think that's a good word. So you have this partnership set up where you give them the opportunity, you give them some voice, right? You give them some say-so in what's going on. They're appreciative. They get better faster. They generally do what you ask them to do more often, and all these other benefits of the healthcare process.
Yeah, all in that building rapport too.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to picture this, and obviously we all have our own ways of applying whole person healthcare. But with this idea of like the 6 dimensions of wellness that you mentioned, the physical, intellectual, occupational, emotional, social, spiritual, are you sitting there and with every single person you're thinking like, oh, what is their occupational stress, or what is their social realm? How are you applying this, and how are you kind of conceptualizing that in your head?
So first of all, you have to be familiar with it. You have to understand what those dimensions are and how they're manifest, and you have to be committed. You have to say, all right, I'm committing myself to doing this, right? Because if you're not committed to it, you aren't going to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to commit yourself to doing this with your patients. And so, quite honestly, you may not have to attend to all 6 of those. It just depends on the situation. But if you've got the 6 in your mind, then you can start peeling back these layers, and the more, in my experience, the more severe the situation for the patient, the more dimensions are involved, right? Because if you have a potentially career-ending injury, which I've walked through this with a number of dancers, for example, if you have a potentially career-ending injury, it's physical, and they're emotional, but they're thinking about, oh my gosh, my entire world is falling apart. Because they've attached their identity to what they're doing. So now, if you have a situation of a more severe injury, I've found that the more severe an injury, the greater the number of dimensions are involved, and the deeper you're gonna go, right? If somebody's got a potentially career-ending injury or season-ending injury, right? They're thinking about a lot of stuff that's pretty deep, like, oh, it's like my life's over. I might not be able to do this again, right? Because they've attached their identity to that, to their well-being and their purpose, right? So that activity, their identity, that becomes very difficult to deal with for them. And so you have to start peeling back these layers and using your knowledge of these 6 dimensions to try to help people be able to make it through their circumstances, right? You're not trying to fix them. You're trying to work with them, again, talking about partnership, to be able to get through what they're dealing with. Because you can't click your fingers, you can't wave a magic wand, you can't do any of that stuff, right? So your only option is to work together with them to be able to get through it. So, for example, I might ask somebody, just again, depending on how the conversation goes, but I might ask, how's everything with your teammates? Right? There's a social dimension. Right? So you've had this severe knee injury, you're on crutches, you're in a brace. Have you been able to go to class? Like, how's your class go? Like, is there a way for you to get to class? Like, we have a special service on our campus that it's a special car that they have that takes, it's like a disabled vehicle, right? That takes people to class around the campus. Makes it easier on them, right? So I can connect somebody with a service like that to try to get them around. I can get with the accessibility office to say, hey, this student has this injury. We do this sometimes with concussions. Students have a concussion and they really shouldn't be taking tests for the next couple of days and doing a bunch of reading and stuff like that. It's really bothering their brain. And work with the accessibility office to try to create that. So you take a physical issue, but now we're dealing intellectually, we're dealing socially. How is this making you feel about your major? Like, this is a pretty severe injury. Are you worried about your major? Are you worried about being able to complete this semester because you're not able to participate in your classes? And so again, for a student, their occupation is being a student, right? It's not, I have a job at Starbucks in the afternoons to help pay the bills. Well, that's not occupational. That's just they're trying to pay the bills, right? That's a different issue. So for a student, their student work is their occupation. For an intercollegiate athlete, their sports participation can be part of that as well. For a professional athlete, obviously their occupation is being an athlete, and so you just, depending on the situation of your patient, you have to be able to deal with this. If you're working in a rehab clinic and you've got a factory worker that's come in as your patient, well, are they thinking about their occupation? Like, can they go back to their occupation? Like, what about the emotions and the stress of paying the bills because they're not able to work now? What about the stress of having to work with workers' compensation? right? So you see all these people. You have to think about, where are these people? Where are they at? What are the things that are going on in their life more than their physical injury, and how is the physical injury operating there? So I would just recommend people to learn these 6 dimensions, learn what they are, and then start bringing them into practice. And again, if it's a very straightforward ankle sprain, and they're going to be out for a couple of days, and then they're going to be back going, and you don't have some of the added dimensions that you have to deal with, right? And certainly not as deeply. But when you have more severe injuries, that's when the stuff really gets kind of heavy, and you have to just think about this. And as you're talking to your patient, you're supposed to take a history. Well, take a 6 dimensions of wellness history. I mean, why not put that in a medical record, right? Ask about physical, ask about emotional, ask about intellectual, ask about social, ask about occupational, ask about spiritual. And here's what the patient said, right? You take it as part of your history. I mean, I think that these are all good ideas just to help people integrate this into their practice. And then it just is a matter of wisdom of, well, is this like obviously fine and I don't need to ask about that, or is this one potentially really a problem and I need to peel this back? And then you have the opportunity to help schedule somebody for counseling at the counseling center, or to be able to find some support in the community from a community organization, or whatever their situation is. That to me is just not only being a good healthcare provider, being a decent person, right? Caring about people and wanting to do for them things that will help them and help them move forward. Because it's not only about getting their physical injury healed and getting them rehabbed. That can't be the whole story.
What happens if you don't apply the whole person healthcare, or you don't ask about some of those dimensions?
Well, you're gonna risk missing a way to help that person, and they may continue to struggle. And in some situations, that struggle is going to lead to some coping behaviors that are not the best either. You've got to really you've got to spend enough time with your athletes or your patients, the population that you're serving, where you understand them and you understand what they're going through, so that you are more wise about the things to ask them to try to unpack this stuff. But if you don't address some of these things, particularly some of the emotional stuff, and also some of the social stuff, if you don't address those, they may end up spiraling down and have some real problems, right? It's getting harder and harder in our world to cope with life. There's a variety of reasons for that, but it's getting really hard. And, particularly thinking about athletic trainers who work with junior high or high school athletes, right? It's hard enough to be just that age, never mind also being an athlete, also having your studies, potentially wanting to get into a university, potentially wanting to get a scholarship to play sports, I mean, on and on. And then, friction with parents, friction with siblings, friction with friends. I mean, just think about it. I mean, how many demands are bombarding them every single day? And so you have to be able to address these, to see them. You don't have to be an expert. I'm not asking you to be a counselor. There are people that are professional counselors. That's their job, right? But you can recognize these things and address them early and get somebody to the proper place to help them in a way that you might not be equipped to do, or that's not part of your scope of practice. So I think if you don't, back to your exact question, if you don't deal with this effectively, if you miss some that you really should have picked up on, you're just risking that athlete having something else going on in their life that's going to negatively impact their athletic performance.
I like what you said about perspective and not knowing. You'll never know that perspective if you don't ask.
Yeah, people are social. I mean, we were not made to live on an island by ourselves,
Mhm.
right? I mean, there's a reason why solitary confinement in a prison is the worst thing ever, because
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
you're completely by yourself. That's not how people were made. People were made to be social. And so all you're doing is you're trying to, as the person in charge of the situation in healthcare, right? If you're the one that's overseeing the care, you're in charge, right? You're the one that has the authority to manage that care. And so all you're doing is you're trying to engage your patient in this process of discussion just to learn about them. I mean,
Mhm.
think of a time where somebody was asking you to tell them about yourself, right? And you could share, you could share where you're from, you could share where you work, and you could share the kind of work you do and the things that you enjoy doing, and all these different things that we tell people. I mean, doesn't that make you feel good when somebody asks you to
Mhm.
share about your life, or would you rather sit and listen to them tell you everything that they want to tell you about their life? I mean, I'd like to listen to somebody's story, but I'd also like them to ask me about mine. I don't only want it to
Mhm.
be a one-way conversation. Right? So
Yeah.
it's very practical. It's just something. It's the way that we're designed as human beings to have this interaction and to have the opportunity to to really to really invest ourselves in people. That's the best word I can probably come up with, right? We're investing ourselves in other people. We're spending our time, the most valuable possession we have. We're investing our time. We're investing our brain power, and we genuinely, it needs to be genuine. We genuinely want to find out about them. We want to hear from them. We want to use what we learn to help them, to get them another step along their path on this earth, right? I'm in front of this person right now. I'm just helping them take another step forward,
Mhm.
right? Another step forward, so that they're encouraged along their path.
Kind of along those lines of just perspective. You hear a lot when you're trying to treat a patient, especially when you're trying to treat them as the whole person, the ideas of empathy and compassion. Can you kind of explain the difference in what does it mean to treat someone with empathy and what does it mean to treat someone with compassion?
Yeah, those are both great words, right? And they're qualities that we need to have. Compassion, and both of them actually come from the same Latin and Greek lineage.
Hmm.
Compassion has the Greek root, as does empathy, from Latin pati, right? Pati, pati.
Mm-hmm.
Com in Latin means with. Pati means suffering. So when you have compassion with suffering, what you're doing is you're suffering with that person, right? That's a good quality, right? It's a
Hmm.
good quality. You're suffering with that person. They're not having to go through it on their own. You have taken steps to understand their suffering and to help walk with them through that suffering, right? That's a good thing.
Hmm.
Empathy though goes a little bit deeper. So with empathy, again, PATI means suffering. That's where the word empathy, or the PATHY, comes from. So you might recognize the Greek word pathos in there, right? So we get pathology and similar words from that, right? So, but the Latin root is suffering. EM, whereas calm and compassion means with, EM means in, in suffering. So with compassion, you're suffering with them. With empathy, you are placing yourself inside their suffering. You are willing to take a step into their life to address what's going on with them, right? With them, there's still a with there, but you're inside. It's the perspective of this. Imagine it as perhaps you have a patient that's in a room, right? They're in a room and they're by themselves. And with compassion, you're right outside the door and you're talking to them and you're encouraging them and you're letting them know that things are going to go well. You're maybe giving them some care advice, you're giving them instructions, right? But you're outside the door. You're with them, but with empathy, you open that door and you go inside. And you're right there. And you're on the inside of what is going on with them. You've asked them to be vulnerable, but you're being vulnerable too. And so the two of you together are walking through this process from an inside perspective so that you can gain as much knowledge as you possibly can to successfully get your patient through that process, right? Because you've been willing to go on the inside. You've been willing to spend the time that it takes to get to know them more, to be as familiar with them as you possibly can. That's difficult. There's no doubt about it. I'm not going to lie to you. That's difficult. Some patients are more resistant to that, right? Some welcome that. Some are more resistant to that. So you have to respect boundaries, right? You have to be respectful of your patient. Your patient gets to decide how much they want to reveal. You can't force that to happen. But when you have the opportunity for empathy, take a step in, right? Take a step into that patient's life. Go in a little bit deeper with them so that you can do as much as you possibly can for them, right? This is not what I think is taught in most athletic training programs, or probably not even in most healthcare programs of any field. This is like difficult stuff that takes time. And so I think it really deserves us to wrestle with it a bit, figure out how does this work for us? How are we going to apply this? And to be honest, every patient's an individual. So what works with patient A is not going to work with patient B. Just like if you're rehabilitating an ankle sprain, what works for patient A is not necessarily what patient B ought to be getting for their treatment and rehab, right? So you're individualizing what you're doing. And so it goes back to some of the fundamental things that we're taught in healthcare about, individual patients and, trying to address what we're doing based on the situation and on the circumstances. And, it isn't going to work for everybody, meaning every patient, but it can work for every healthcare practitioner. And then you have to have the wisdom and the compassion to figure out how you're going to apply it and when empathy makes a lot of sense, because you're going to go inside, because that patient's allowed you to go inside and you're going to help them at a much deeper level. Hopefully that's clear. Hopefully what I'm saying is clear, and that the listeners will understand and see some nuggets there that they can pull from, right? I always say, if you want to find a pearl, you got to go through a lot of muck, right? So you pop open an oyster, you want the pearl in that oyster. Well, there's a lot of goo in there that you got to get through to find that oyster, or the pearl. So hopefully I gave at least a pearl or two that people can dig around and find.
Oh, absolutely. And I agree with that. I feel like empathy, compassion, like people talk about it like, oh, you should do that. And then like no one really has like well, how do you do that? So I think that's very helpful.
Well, that's good. I think it's important. I've been doing it for a long time, and I feel like it's important. And I've taught students that, and they've had good success. I've taught that to healthcare workers all over the world, different places, doing different kinds of specialties that they're in and whatnot. I've had good feedback about it. So I hope that your listeners enjoy it as well and can use it.
Yeah, speaking of actually applying, going back to these dimensions of wellness, I know that like through the courses that I took with you, like I'm pretty familiar with the model, and we can definitely put some links up so that other people can kind of look into it themselves. But can you give a brief for like each realm? Can you give a brief way of how to apply like I feel like physical is pretty straightforward, but maybe more like intellectual, occupational, especially maybe social and spiritual or emotional. I feel like those three are kind of a little bit more difficult to conceptualize.
Okay. Well, so first of all, so the emotional dimension probably gets linked. I mean, they're all linked to each other, right? That's part of understanding the six dimensions. But the emotional is the one that gets to spill over the most because so many things can interact our emotions or the way we feel, right? Emotions is the way we feel. Intellectual is just our thinking, our ability to use our brain, right? So it could be studying anatomy, could be learning choreography, could be learning football plays, could be deciding what to do in a given situation in some other kind of a sports match. So, I mean, that's just the using the brain of analyzing and figuring things out. The social, people are linked in so many different social environments, and so a family is one example, right? A class, a dance ensemble, a theater troupe, a baseball team, a dormitory, roommates, right? On and on and on. So these are all different social places where people operate, right? So we understand that the social is that interaction. The occupational, as I mentioned, so for a student, it's their school, like, so it's different than intellectual processes. Occupational, just like generally being in school, right, or having a professional job, somebody that pays you for doing a certain thing. And then the spiritual, that sort of purpose, meaning of life kind of thing. So if you're going to address these, so I'll give an example from performing arts, and maybe that can translate into other people's patient environments. But if we have a dancer, let's say, who has an injury, well, dance classes, as you might expect, you do a lot of dancing. So if you are a dancer and you have an injury that's not allowing you to participate, I want that dancer in the studio. Now, the dancer might have to sit and watch everybody else in the studio dance. But I want the dancer in the studio because I want the dancer in that social environment that they're used to being in. But I also have to remember there's an emotional component to that because they're feeling downtrodden because they're not able to do what everybody else is doing. But in my view and in my experience, having them in that social environment is way better than having them hike back to the dorm and sit there and feel sorry for themselves on their own. I'd much rather have them in that social environment that they're used to being in. And I think it's really helpful. And plus there are things that they can do as they're observing. Or they may be able to help the teacher with some administrative tasks, or potentially, depending on the level of class, level of student, with some instructional tasks, and just if the teacher will get them involved, I want them in that social environment. From an occupational standpoint, it's typically about how is this situation that's confronted the artist or the athlete going to impact their occupation. They may have had a sports, if sports, let's take a situation of someone works at a rehab clinic and they have somebody that plays in softball league on the weekends, right? That's not their job, not a professional softball player, but they got injured playing softball on the weekends. So now you have a sports injury, but now they might have a job during the week that requires certain ability that's now limited because they've had an injury. You see what I mean? And so you have to say, all right, how is this going to impact their occupation? What can I do as an athletic trainer to help this person navigate having to go back to work now with this limitation? Who can I call? What letter can I write? What email can I send? Like, how can I be involved in the process of getting them engaged back into their occupation. What kinds of accommodations can we make, right? All these different things. Is there some sort of bracing or taping or something that we can do that's going to make it possible for them to do what they typically do? And sometimes you can't, or sometimes you're really limited in that. And it's okay, right? You do what you can do, right? I mean, you're trying to do what's the best thing for the patient. That's always the overarching concern. What's the best thing for the patient? The spiritual, this is really a challenging one. It may be the most challenging, and for some people, it's super challenging because they've never thought about it much or dealt with it. Everybody ought to have a purpose, right? What's like? Why are you on this earth? I mean, it has to be a reason. You can't. It's not just, oh, I'm just here, and then I'll be gone in a few years, and that's that, right? I mean, there has to be more to it than that. And so, helping people address that aspect, because you'd be surprised, certain injury situations, if they're significant enough, they start challenging these people's idea of being, of having meaning, being on this earth, and their purpose and their meaning. And so in this situation, you have to be able to walk with them through that, right? It's that same old partnership. You might not have all the answers, you might not believe what they believe, but ultimately you've got to use what you know to walk them through. If you've studied these 6 dimensions and have that in your mind, and you're trying to use this as whole person care, you most likely know a lot more about it than the patient does. And so if you don't have to be an expert, you just have to know about it to the extent that you can apply information that addresses the situation with that given patient. So, and you can go into literature, you can find you go in PubMed, you search purpose of life, meaning of life, you search terms like that, and you'll find a whole lot of articles, and you can do some reading about it and see how it's being addressed and see what the research shows. Sometimes I need to add this one point because of some very overwhelming evidence about it. But one aspect of the spiritual dimension is people's faith background. And it has been shown repeatedly that people that have a strong faith background are better on virtually every measure of health and wellness than people that don't have a faith background. And that's something that I think is important for listeners to know, but it's something that can help us, right? You can ask that question. It's not offensive. I've never had anybody offended by asking, what's your faith background? People are willing to say that, because if that is important for them, then that that's something that's going to help your patient, right? That might not be your background, but it's not about you. It's about what is right for your patient. So if you know that the medical literature supports that people with a faith background do better on virtually every measure of health and wellness than people that don't, then you can encourage that person. It's like, tell me about your faith background. Like, how do you execute that? Like, what are the things that you're doing? Don't be afraid of conversations like that. It's not weird. It's not offensive. And it's completely appropriate within healthcare. You're trying to take care of the whole health of your patient. And so, again, it might not be what you believe, but you can help that patient decide, yeah, I kind of have let that get some short shrift. Maybe I do need to go back and kind of address that a little bit more. And you can say, well, the medical literature supports that is very likely going to be helpful to you. So let me encourage you to do that. It's a perfectly normal, acceptable part of healthcare. And you're not trying to persuade them to what you believe. You're not trying to change their mind about anything. You're simply asking them, where are they at? Here's some thoughts I can give you that might help you and encourage you in that particular area of your whole person wellness. That's how I would do it. That's how I have done it.
Mm-hmm.
You brought up the point of how we're just attempting to address these, and sometimes it's going to be difficult
Mm-hmm.
for them to actually be implemented. I know I've seen this with, like, for example, um, the car that takes them, even if they're on
Yeah.
crutches. Like, sometimes people would just rather crutch to their class rather than be escorted or taken,
Mm-hmm.
because that makes them seen as injured, or they don't want to be seen being taken by campus safety or
Mm-hmm.
whoever's escorting them to class.
Yep. So now an emotional you have an emotional fallout. All
Mm-hmm.
right. So you're talking about the emotional dimension. So
Mm-hmm.
what do you do in that situation? Well, you ask the patient, let's think about some options. So you have to go to class. You can't just lay in your bed all day long till you're well. You have to go to
Mm-hmm.
class. So, like, let's talk about some options. And when you talk through it and you say, well, we could do this way. You can crutch to class. Well, what if it's snowing? What if it's in the winter and it's snowing, right? Or what if it's a torrential downpour? Like, are you seriously going to crutch to class? You know, just talk through the options. Talk through the options,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
right? Too often
Or
we're just
can you
like,
take
and I understand people are busy, right? And patient loads are high, and you're like, all right, next person, next person, next person, next person. I get that. It takes time to do this well. It takes time, but you
Mm-hmm.
have to figure out a way to do it so your patient is well served. And so in this situation, to help deal with the emotional aspect of that, you talk it through, like, all right, well, I hear you. I can set up this car for you. You don't want it? Let's talk about what our other options are. And so of all these options, what's the best? Takes longer to
Mm-hmm.
crutch around, but if that's what you want to do, fine. But you talk about this, and then they go, no, I don't really like it, but maybe the car is the best way to do it, or at least
mm-hmm.
I'll I'll crutch to this
part
class because the
way.
building's close, but for the faraway class, I want to take the car, right? And you can have a happy
Mm-hmm.
medium, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
But if we're willing to talk to people and try to just use our wisdom and our sense to try to get the information together and make decisions that way, and you're not saying,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't care what you think, you're taking the car. I've already set it up. It's going to be there at your doorstep tomorrow morning to take you to class. Now, what have you done? You've alienated your patient, right? So you got
Yeah.
another emotional problem, right? You probably have an intellectual problem as well. So you have to just deal with it in a sensible, logical, compassionate,
Mm-hmm.
reasonable, decent, right? All those words. You have to deal with it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a winner. I mean, I don't recall ever having a bad response to just having a decent conversation with a patient when they know you're trying to help them. I don't think this is pie in the sky. I think it's just a revolutionary way for people to think about healthcare. So I don't know. Tell me,
Yeah,
though, if
absolutely.
it's pie in the sky. Would you agree this is like a revolutionary new way of thinking to try to deal with patients? Does that seem like what I'm
I
talking
think,
about? Because that's what I'm trying to talk about.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's up and coming. I think it's a lot of people have already implemented it. I
Yeah.
think some people are also kind of at that spot where they've started, but they want to go more into it, and they just don't know how to deepen that connection.
Well, I was also going to say, I think this is why a lot of people get frustrated with just the healthcare system as a whole, is because, like, a lot of times this isn't applied. And that's where you see the frustration. So I think a lot of people recognize that and be like, okay, well, how can we be different?
Yeah.
You ready for some action?
Yes, let's do it. So we talked about a lot of strategies of how to kind of implement whole person healthcare into your practice. But what would you say is the first step an AT can take to implement whole person healthcare?
That's an easy question. Make your patient more important than yourself.
That's good.
If you will make others as more important than yourself, it's going to go a lot easier for everybody.
Mhm.
And I think that if you can't even get to that basic framework where others are more important than you,
Mhm.
then nothing else is going to fall into place. So I think that's the key. That to me is the essential piece that makes this work, is that you care about others more
Mhm.
than you care about yourself. And that just builds the relationships that you need to really develop this. So that's what I would say.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. This was amazing.
Pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure to be with you guys. You guys are doing terrific work. And Sandra, incredible blessing to have you as a student and in the class where you learned a lot of this stuff. And Randy, you were a student with us at the same time. And, you guys are doing a good work. And I just really, really appreciate the opportunity to share with you.
We appreciate you, Jeff. Thank you so much.
I really loved this interview from Jeff, and listening to him talk about like the 6 dimensions of wellness, and how to access that. It made me think of a time with one of my preceptors, and she had been doing a scenario with me where she was talking about how her, I couldn't remember if it was like her wrist or her fingers or her forearm, something in her arm, was bothering her. And so I was like going through my evaluation, and nothing was really leading to, like, I couldn't really figure out like why her sport would lead to, like, I was trying to figure out the mechanism. Like, her sport just wasn't really leading to like a forearm, hand, wrist injury. And so I'm like trying to work my way through this. And that's when it dawned on me, like, I have to ask, like, well, what else are you doing? Like what do you do for work?
Yep.
And then that's when she told me that she was a cashier. And so she's like ringing up things all day, and, she's working long hours, like, whatever this little story was. And I remember that moment because then afterwards she talked about how she usually tries to like stump her athletic training students with this. And because it doesn't make sense, the mechanism with the sport, I don't remember the sport now, but she was having like a tendonitis, like an overuse kind of issue. And so she said that not a lot of people actually go and like dive deeper and try to figure out like what is going on outside of sport. And that is really one of those dimensions that you're looking at occupational. What else do you have to look at to get the bigger picture so that we can treat the whole person?
Yeah, I think that often gets forgotten, especially like in a traditional setting. A lot of our student athletes, they have to work. So they do have jobs, and their injury does affect their job. Or even just the standpoint of, you want your athlete to come in for rehab, but what happens if they don't live on campus and they don't have a car? Right? You can't really get mad at that person for like not being consistent if their ride's not consistent. So I think this is really refreshing to remember that, like, we're all just human, and there are things that affect our student athletes, our patients, that maybe, we need to take account for.
I mean, I think I shared this too on the podcast previously, but like I had an athlete who was doing really well, ankle sprain or some sort of lower leg injury. And then he comes back after a weekend and he's super swollen, and we're like, well, what did you do all weekend? And he was like, nothing. I did nothing. And we're like, well, this didn't happen on Friday. So okay, like what's going on? And then one of the athletes ratted him out, and he was like, what are you talking about? He was walking at the beach. Well, walking at the beach, like walking through the sand, is a little bit tougher than just walking on regular ground. So like that's something that like maybe they're not even aware of. Like they just, sometimes you do have to dig a little bit deeper and try to figure this out.
They did nothing at the beach.
Yeah, nothing.
That's what that is. That's funny you said that, because that is my favorite. Those when they're like, I did nothing. I'll be like, so you laid there for 24 hours. You did nothing.
Yes.
And then that's usually when they're like, well, no. It's like, okay.
Yeah, you just got to dig deeper.
Yeah, that's true.
So if you guys are new to our podcast, we do a variety of different episodes here. We have interviews just like this one. We also have story episodes where we bring stories from real life athletic trainers on a highlight topic and share experiences from different perspectives. And we also have education episodes where Randy reads a lot of research articles, synthesizes them, and we talk about them in a conversational format. And then those become Category A CEUs for you. And the latest 5 are free. Thank you so much to Athletic Training Chat and Clinically Pressed. If you guys are interested in any other CEUs, now is the perfect time to get ahead of your CEUs and utilize our MedBridge discount, $101 off using code ATCorner. All the details are down in the show notes below. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.